Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is John Nori. I'll be your moderator for today, and I'd like to go over just a few things before we begin. Our topic is taking a multi-tiered approach on reducing chronic absence. If you're having any sort of difficulty today during the webinar, there's a toll-free number you can call. It's on your screen now, and at the bottom of the screen in red is another number you'll need to record. Jot that down in case you need to call the toll-free for technical assistance, because you will need that webinar ID number in order to get help. We'd appreciate it if you were following us on Twitter, if you would use hashtag NASSP webinar, and of course you can find NASSP on Facebook at facebook.com/principles. And as always, our website is nassp.org/webinar. The recording of this webinar today, along with the slides that are used during the webinar, will be at that address within a day or two of the end of the webinar. So check back there and you'll be able to get the slides. I know often people ask where they get their hands on the slides, and that's the answer. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Sue Fothergill is the Associate Director of Policy at AttendanceWorks. Her responsibilities include managing AttendanceWorks' network to advance state attendance policy and practice, and that includes providing technical assistance at the state and local level. She previously worked as the Director of Baltimore Student Attendance Campaign and spent 8 years as an education advocate with the ACLU of Maryland. She currently volunteers as the Director of Advocacy for City Neighborhoods Foundation, a nonprofit charter management organization. She has also served as the founding co-chair of the Baltimore Education Coalition and is the recipient of the John Brown Education Advocacy Award from Children First and the Distinguished Service Award from the PTA Council of Baltimore County. She holds a BA in Public Policy from the University of Baltimore. Sue, are you with me?
I am, John. Can you hear me?
I can. Without further ado, then, there's your first slide.
Okay, thank you, John, and hello to everyone on the call. I'm really pleased to be here with you today and to hopefully share with you some insights, evidence-based practices, and ideas and ways in which all of you can incorporate into the work you're already doing to help to support improved student attendance. A little bit about AttendanceWorks. We're a national nonprofit organization focused on improving outcomes for students by ensuring that they're there in school every day to benefit from the instruction. We focus on building public awareness about this issue of chronic absenteeism. We support state campaign strategies around improving policy and practice. And then we also work at the local level with school principals and leaders and district leaders to help to support improved policy and practice to improve attendance and reduce chronic absenteeism. I'm going to spend some time today talking a little bit about the definition of chronic absence so that we're all on the same page in how we think about this particular measure, share with you the academic impact of when students are missing 10% of their days on roll, and then we'll move into the multi-tiered systems of support, and I'll share with you some of the evidence-based practices that we're aware of. And then finally, I'll direct you to our website with some of our free web-based resources. With that, John, next slide, please. So next slide, please. So one of the important first steps is coming to a common understanding of how we measure chronic absence and what it is. We account for chronic absence by monitoring which students are missing 10% of their days on roll. Generally, that means missing about 2 days a month, and we count all types of lost instructional time. So we do not distinguish between whether a student has an excused absence, an unexcused absence, or they're missing school due to suspension. If collectively, for any of these reasons, a student is missing school enough to be missing 2 or more days on roll, we know from research that the academic impact is such that we should be paying attention to this level of absenteeism. Also, it's important to notice that chronic absence is different from truancy, which is monitoring only unexcused absences, or average daily attendance, which measures on average how many students are showing up any given day. Next slide. So one of the things that's happening across the country, and this is evident in the state ESSA plans that have all now been submitted, is a shift from monitoring just unexcused absences to recognizing that lost instructional time in whatever form it takes when it's at the level of 10% is serious enough to warrant its own independent analysis. Currently, 36 states and the District of Columbia have all adopted chronic absence as at least one of their measures of accountability for school quality in their new ESSA plans. Next slide. One of the things that I wanted to help folks on this call understand is how average daily attendance, which is a data point we've all monitored effectively for many years now, can actually mask chronic absence. And so what you're looking at here is a set of 10 schools with different levels of average daily attendance in the 90%. And this is an area where, even though years of learning have taught us that if we have a 90% or more, that we have an A, on monitoring students at risk based on their attendance, this is not an A. And the math behind it, if you think about it for just a moment, if you have a school, which I know is going to be much smaller than most of your schools, but if you had a school with 200 children and 10 of them were absent, that would give your school a 95% ADA. The question becomes, for those 10 students that were absent that day, is whether or not they're regularly absent. Are they part of a cohort of students that are missing regularly? Or is this a one-off absence due to an illness or something that could not be avoided? And so for that group of 10 students, or any other given day where a school might have 95% ADA, the question really becomes, who are those 10 students that are missing and whether or not they're missing frequently? So just as you wouldn't want to evaluate which students need additional support with their biology coursework based on the average score of your biology HSAs, you wouldn't want to evaluate which students your school should be intervening with based on the average of everybody's attendance. Next slide. The other thing that we notice when we differentiate between truancy and chronic absence is that when we monitor truancy, we often underestimate the number of children that are at risk based on their attendance. And so as you can see here from this particular slide in Baltimore City, where, as John mentioned earlier, I have numerous years of experience, when we evaluated the difference of monitoring truancy versus chronic absence, we identified thousands more children across the system who were missing enough school to be academically at risk. And so from the perspective of improving outcomes for students, we want to ensure that we're using the right data point to know which students are the ones to be paying attention to for the early warning indicator of absenteeism. Next slide. The other thing that we've learned along the way is that part of the reason we underestimate chronic absence is because chronic absence is oftentimes sporadically happening across the school year. And across our country, a lot of data systems have been set up to flag kids who miss several consecutive days on roll. We also intuitively, as parents and teachers and educators in the field, recognize the impact of missing several days on roll, in a row on roll, because of the profound impact of the lost instructional time. When we talk with families about the impact of sporadic absenteeism, or when we talk to students, they're less likely to say to us that they're worried about lost instructional time. There's a false perception that if I miss a day here or there, or if my child misses a day here or there, they can stay caught up. However, when the missing a day here or there starts to add up over time, we know from the research that, in fact, students do not stay caught up. Next slide. The other thing I want to share with you, and you can visit our website at AttendanceWorks, we've been evaluating the scope and the scale of chronic absence across the country using the Office of Civil Rights data. They currently have released chronic absence by district and school for almost every area of the country using the 1314 Civil Rights Data Collection. And what we found is that chronic absence is a significant issue for every part of the country, with some areas of our country actually having more profound rates or extreme rates of chronic absenteeism. But most districts and most schools do have the opportunity to look at their data differently and identify for your schools which students might fall into this category. Next slide. So I'm going to move into the academic impact. The interesting thing about chronic absenteeism is this is probably one of the most often repeated exercises in looking at the impact between students missing 10% of their days on roll and what their academic outcomes are. I'm going to share with you a couple of brief snippets from research that I'm most familiar with, but we have collected all of the research on our website if you want to dig in a bit more and read about this topic at greater depth. And so what you're looking at here, and I'm going to do elementary, middle, and high. So what you're looking at here is a group of second graders and their reading scores. And what you'll notice is the stair-step pattern down for each additional year of chronic absenteeism, with the students on the right having been chronically absent every single year from pre-kindergarten to second grade. And so as secondary school administrators, vice principals, and educators, part of what you're experiencing when you receive students that are significantly academically behind could include a history of absenteeism and profound lost instructional time. Dr. Bob Belfont, who I saw speak yesterday, said that when they look at the data for some districts, they have been able to identify students who over a period of time have missed a full year of school over several years when you added up all the lost instructional time. Next slide. We also looked at the data in Baltimore and asked the question of the predictability of high school graduation as it relates to sixth grade attendance. And as you can see here from this bar chart, the sixth graders on the left who were severely chronically absent, so this is missing about 4 days a month on roll, almost 60% of that particular cohort of students never made it to graduation. And then the chronically absent students, the group in the middle, about 40% of them never made it to graduation, whereas the students on the right, not only, but 25% of them didn't make it to graduation. And the students on the right would include both at-risk attendance and satisfactory attendance. Next slide. The other thing we looked at in Baltimore was the relationship between attendance and course completion. And as all of you know, on-time ninth grade promotion is a significant indicator as to whether or not a student will graduate from high school. And what we found is that the higher the rate of attendance, the more likely the student would be to pass all their core subjects. And as their attendance slipped, so did their ability to pass their core subjects. And as secondary school administrators, you understand the profound amount of information and daily assignments and homework and classwork that that students receive every day. And so missing just a day here or there obviously is going to put them behind. Next slide. So just to wrap it up, we know chronic absenteeism is a new measure. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to track it, but I encourage you to think about how you are already monitoring chronic absence in your buildings, and if not, what are ways in which you might be able to access that type of data, and also the academic impact. And with that, I'm just going to provide you a moment of reflection and ask that you type in the chat box if there was anything that you learned that was new or surprising or that gave you a greater sense of urgency. And we'll give you just a couple of just about 60 seconds, and then we'll keep moving.
Sue, and I want to add, too, that if folks have questions, they can type those into the question box as well. Thank you.
Oftentimes when I'm talking to principals, I hear that one of the things they're surprised by is how average daily attendance masks chronic absence. And having not looked at the data before, the most immediate response I hear from principals is that they want to go back and look at their data and see which students are missing at that rate of attendance. Seeing no questions at this time, we will keep going.
I do have one person who typed into the question box that Dibbles, D-I-B-E-L-S, was an eye-opener. And here's another one. Here's another, if you don't mind me sharing these. The fact that chronic absenteeism may not be monitored when it is sporadic creates a greater need for urgency. True.
Absolutely, and I think the one opportunity here is that because it's become, the awareness around this issue has dramatically increased. And so the thing that is important to know is this indicator prior to 2006 was not commonly understood. And then because of the great research out of Johns Hopkins and Chicago Education Research Consortium and others, that there is increased attention and awareness, and there is improving capacity to be able to monitor that sporadic absenteeism over time so that we can flag kids before the absences add up. So there are, I think, improvements in systems happening currently that should help you as administrators to be able to look at this data. So getting to the tiered interventions, the prevention and intervention strategies, a lot of what I'm going to talk about are things you are already doing. I think that the primary insight that I want to flag here for you are two things. One, there may be a new idea that you hadn't considered yet, but secondly, how are these things that you're already doing, how can you increase the intentionality around attendance specifically? So if you're already doing one of these things, what is the opportunity to weave in a greater emphasis on attendance? And so if you go to the next slide, John.
Sue, before I do, I want you to know that some questions have come in that may influence how you're going to go forward. Do you want to hear those now, or shall we?
Absolutely.
Here's the first one. How do you advise us to handle students with documented health concerns which keep them from the school?
Mm-hmm.
And the second is, what are some high leverage strategies that are effective in getting high school students that are chronic or severe back to school?
Okay, those are two really helpful questions. I will keep them in my mind. I will come to them when the time is appropriate, because we will talk about health for just a moment, and when we get to high leverage, that's in the tier 2 category.
Okay.
So I will get to that when we get to tier 2. Next slide. So this is pyramid. I know you've all have seen this pyramid, so we're taking a public health approach to reducing absenteeism. This is the attendance version of your MTSS. And what I would highly recommend is incorporating these strategies into any existing tiered intervention system you're using in your buildings, whether that is PBIS or MTSS or RTI. But the idea is that we wouldn't want schools to try to create a separate team or see this as an independent activity, but rather recognize that folding attendance into the work you're doing is probably going to be the most effective. And you already are gathering the right people around the table in your teams, whether that is your instructional leadership team or your school support staff, if you're not already including the school nurse, and we'll talk a little bit more about the health piece in a moment. So thinking maybe a little bit more expansively about who should be on that team when you come to attendance, but ultimately linking it to the other work you're doing. So there's a set of strategies around prevention, tier 2 intervention when students reach that 10% mark, and then tier 3 when students continue to be chronically absent even after we're doing our best efforts in tier 1 and tier 2. So if you go to the next slide, please. The foundation of tier 1 are these 5 site-based strategies. We believe, and we've seen evidence and outcomes in schools, that when schools are implementing activities in each one of these 5 areas as part of their prevention strategies, that they begin to see reductions in chronic absenteeism and also at risk for chronic absenteeism. So those are the students who are attending less than 95% of the time, but haven't quite hit that 90% mark. Those young people are also at risk. So recognizing good and improved attendance, the key idea here is that we're not only noticing perfect attendance, especially when we get into secondary school, we want to acknowledge and make explicit what the expectation is for good attendance. One of the things we've learned from talking with students and families is that there's not clarity around what is a level of attendance that is equated to improved academic outcomes. And so communicating with students and families that the expectation is that they miss either 9 or fewer days of school a year for satisfactory, or 5 or fewer days of school a year for good attendance is important, because otherwise they're self-determining what that level of attendance is, and oftentimes miscalculating, especially if there are a lot of students missing a lot of school, then the norm setting isn't happening naturally. So that there has to be explicit teaching on this part. Engaging students and parents, obviously you are all working to do that on a regular basis, and so the intentionality with attendance. So when you host your ninth grade transition strategies, whether those are summer bridge programs or your ninth grade visits, when you are doing your school assemblies, just incorporating consistently and throughout the year constant messaging about attendance with constant reminding. We are all coming to this new recognition, and this isn't something that can be taught once and then left. So there's the need to continually come back to the message. C, monitoring attendance data and practice, as we talked about earlier. First, knowing which kids and groups of students are at risk for chronic absence, and then also monitoring the interventions and whether they are effective. And we'll talk more about that in Tier 2. Providing personalized early outreach. A lot of our systems, to make life easier for everybody, we've gone to robocalls and systemized letters, and we've systemized the phone calls, and we've put in place strategies to ensure that families are getting notified when their child misses school or when absences begin to add up. But a lot of that is impersonal. And what we would suggest is when you have a student who is missing enough school to be at risk academically, that we shift from the impersonal. So we don't take it away, but then we add a personalized early outreach. And there are ways that we can do that in secondary schools to ensure that every student who is at risk receives a call home. And so that can be through advisories, through homerooms, and through other kinds of intervention teams, but really thinking about which subgroups of students need a personal call home, or their families need a personal relationship to start to get our arms around why the student is missing too much school. And then developing programmatic responses to barriers in a prevention framework. And so what I mean by that is, in a particular school, as an example, there was a principal who recognized that she had a number of students who were missing school because they had unclean uniforms, and they didn't have enough money to buy enough uniforms to last the week, and they also didn't have enough money to keep their uniforms regularly washed. So when their uniforms got dirty, they just didn't come to school until they could get them washed again. So this particular principal was able to raise money or get a donation of a washer and a dryer, and allowed the students for whom that was a challenge to be able to wash their clothes at school. And so now it's no longer trying to solve a problem one by one, but creating a strategy that then is accessible to a group of students who are experiencing a similar barrier. Another challenge we hear about often in secondary school are students who choose not to come to school because they didn't finish their homework the night before. So they don't want to come to school and turn in an incomplete assignment. I don't know what you all would consider is the strategy, but I would flag it for you to say, figuring out for your individual schools, if this is an issue where kids aren't coming to school because they don't want to turn in an incomplete assignment, we obviously don't want them missing a whole instructional day because of that barrier. So what's the other opportunity we can put in place to ensure that they still come to school and also don't feel penalized? And so creating some space for those kinds of problem-solving solutions in a prevention-oriented way. Next slide. So the other thing I just want to touch on that's really important to recognize is school climate and culture as the foundation of an attendance improvement strategy. We know that attendance is higher when all students feel welcome, when all students feel connected to an adult in the building, and when we're working to meet the basic needs of our most economically challenged families and students. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, just building awareness about how absences can easily add up and put students off track to academic success. Next slide. There's an organization called the National School Climate Center that have materials on their website, and they promote webinars to help to support school leadership and learning more about school climate. The 4 domains of climate are relationship, teaching and learning, environment, and safety. And we're not the experts in climate, but we do know from the research that it's profoundly important, so I do want to flag it for you here. Next slide. And the other thing that we've developed as an organization is an observation tool to help school leaders and their teams assess visually the relationship between their school climate and attendance. And so we have this key piece of resource here for you if you're interested in this area of work. And we created a user guide as well. And so it explores things like having people notice whether or not students are being greeted warmly on their way in. We've heard situations where if a student shows up to school a few minutes late or comes to school out of uniform, rather than receiving a warm and welcoming greeting, they might be forced to, say, line up outside of the building and wait until everybody else goes in. And that's not a great start to the day. And so really thinking about how we both reinforce the rules, but do it in a way that's respectful and still recognizes the dignity and humanity of all our kids. Next slide. So I'm going to just move quickly through a couple of ideas. We think that part of the work around increasing awareness is making it visual. So different schools have chose to do this in different ways. Some schools use bulletin boards and other visual reinforcing messages in the hallway. This particular school on the right, the VIP lounge, where students who had shown improved attendance or had met a particular attendance goal had the opportunity to access a special place in the building, like a chill-out room. And so for each of you, thinking through what are the visual ways that you can reinforce attendance messaging as part of your regular school culture is what I would encourage you to take away from this. Next slide. We also know that student advisories can help to promote a sense of belonging. And so we've seen schools, when they utilize their advisories or their homerooms, to really help to ensure that that adult that's managing homeroom or advisory is responsible for building a relationship for their group of kids, because especially in larger buildings, it gets harder to figure out how to institute a relational strategy for every single student. And so figuring out what structures you have in your buildings that you might want to use to reinforce this messaging of relationship, and noticing when kids are missing. I know some of your schools may have academies, for example. So really examining your own structures and recognizing that relationships are key to ensuring that kids come to school every day. Students want to feel known, and they want to feel cared about. And if they do feel known and cared about, that will take you a long way into helping to support their improved attendance. It also helps to ensure that when they are missing too much school, that there isn't an adult in the building who might have the relationship necessary to really begin to understand what the barriers are. Next slide. So when it comes to the health piece, I mean, one key issue is just ensuring that folks understand when they should come to school and when they shouldn't. So one of the things we know is that people are making decisions about staying home when in fact they should be in school. So if I have a cough but I don't have a fever, I should be in school. We have some flyers, health flyers, that have been looked at by pediatricians and school pediatricians to affirm that these are the right set of standards. But going back to the raising awareness and messaging and expectation setting, just being really clear about when a health absence is actually acceptable versus when you're not too sick to stay home. When students, to the point someone else raised earlier, when a student is missing school due to a health condition that causes frequent absences, there's two buckets to that. One is a health condition that, if managed well, a student should be in school every day. So, for example, asthma is a common reason that students miss school, when in fact they should be in school for the most part. And so if you do see a student with a health condition that, from your understanding, if properly managed, should not be a barrier to attendance, then it may be necessary to involve the school health personnel or district health personnel, or figuring out with the family what is happening with that particular health condition, that even though it shouldn't be a barrier to attendance, it has become a barrier to attendance. We have seen situations where families are sharing asthma medicine across several kids, and so then none of the kids are actually getting their full dosage. They're medically fragile. They're out of school for PT or OT. in those situations, we can't remove that barrier to attendance. Students have to miss school to fulfill their IEPs or other prescribed interventions for health. And at that point, our recommendation is paying close attention to the academic portion of their success and figuring out how to support that student and staying caught up academically, even as they have to be absent. So we would never suggest deviating from a set of doctor's orders that are very clear that it is in the student's best interest that they follow through on their other OT, PT, or other types of health interventions that are necessary for that student. So it really does require differentiating the population and understanding when we say health absence, what kind of health absence are we actually talking about. Next slide. We also do work with young people and getting them involved in helping to create the message, in part because we're all adults, and while we think, I know how to speak young people language or encourage them. We also know that peer-to-peer messaging is highly influential. Young people listen to young people know each other's language. And so we've worked with young people to develop messaging in a number of schools across the country, and for your own buildings, really understanding within your buildings which students are influential and asking them to help figure out what's the right message. We know that students can help to be hugely significantly, a very significant resource in understanding what the common barriers are, and also in helping to understand what some solutions might be from their perspective. Next slide. So I'm going to pause here and ask you to reflect on a couple of key questions. And you can reflect on all of them now, and also you could take them back to your teams and reflect. But what are the opportunities in your buildings to promote the importance of attendance, and specifically what is good attendance? What are opportunities to increase the student's sense of belonging? Or what are opportunities to put in place strategies that would help to address common barriers to student attendance? And then, John, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them now as well before we move into Tier 2.
Well, I think you've answered this one, but it came up since the last time I read questions, and that was, what do we do about parents who enable students to not attend?
That's a challenge, and I'll say a couple of things. One is the question of what is it that's exactly happening? So number one, first is the expectation with all parents, expectation setting with all parents. The best opportunity to do that is in the transition. Parents are more open to ideas and more open and more available in the sort of the first initial weeks when my young person, and I'm a parent of 2 kids, right? So when my son is transitioning into high school, I was much more present in the first couple of weeks, and I showed up at the meetings because I wanted to understand what's this new place that he's going to. Once my son's been there for a couple of years, it might be a little bit harder to get my attention, right, as a parent. So really leveraging those key transition moments to communicate all the messages that you think they need to hear and making sure they hear you on attendance. And you can use data and research in parent-friendly ways to show them the difference. Here's a kid who graduated, and their attendance every year, they missed less than 5 days a year. Here's a student who missed, more than 9 days a year in their graduation. So if you're one of those parents who wants your child to graduate and go on to college or career, then we need your help in ensuring your student is here every day. Because every parent wants their child to graduate, especially once they become teenagers. The other thing is if there's a barrier happening within the household, so it's not just the parent's misunderstanding or lack of clarity about the importance of attendance, but there's some other significant reason why that student's missing school, then we have to get to the barrier. So generally, we either have to solve a problem or we have to change a behavior. And so we have to understand what is the contributing factor to why that parent isn't already ensuring that their kid gets to school every day. And some of it is just misconceptions. Some of it is significant challenges. And if you have parents who are leaving before their kids leave for school, they may think they're going to school. And so as a parent, one of the things I had to do when my son was in high school is make arrangements with the school that they would text me if my son didn't show up. because I wasn't sure if he was getting to school every day. So sometimes we have to be in even greater communication when our kids get older because they're making decisions and we're not always aware of it as parents. And then the last thing I would say is that we have to help parents understand when making decisions about where to draw the battle lines with your teenagers, that this is one of the most important battle lines that they can draw is getting their kids to school every day. I can't teach my son chemistry. I couldn't teach him biology, but the thing I could do is to make sure he got to school so that the educators who know how to do this kind of lesson, that know how to teach my child these lessons, that he was there for them. And so helping parents understand that for their child to succeed, school is the place they need to be. And it also keeps their kids safe, so that's another key message. I hope that helps. Is there anything else, John, before we go on?
There's a two-part question. What's considered improved attendance, and is there a data point that makes sense?
So improved attendance. So this is when a student is missing too much school. So if a student has gone beyond missing a day a month on average, that student is now at risk. And so improved attendance is based on that young person. So if I'm a student and I'm missing, say, a day a week, and you're trying to work with me to get better, then we have to come to an agreement about what's possible. And so the goal would be that I'm missing no days a week unless I'm sick. But there might be a benchmark between where I am and where we're trying to get me, depending on the level of challenges I'm experiencing. So I would say that improved attendance really is an individual student question based on the level of absenteeism and based on what you understand about why they're missing school. And then when they hit that benchmark, so I was missing a day a week, and now we agreed I would only miss a day a month, which is still too much, but we're trying to get me to a place. If I hit that benchmark, then we want to acknowledge that. You know, great job, Sue. We set this goal together, and you achieved it. So it really is sort of individualized. And then the other important point here, and we'll get to it in Tier 2, is that we also have to look at subgroups of students. We cannot solve this problem one kid at a time. It will take us forever, especially in some of our larger high schools. And so with that, you might set a school benchmark. So you have a group of kids who you're putting in place a particular intervention. As a team, you might say, they're currently missing 3 or more days a month, or they're chronically absent and missing about 15% of their days on roll. We want to get them to 10%, and then we want to get them to 5%. And so as a team, then you've set a benchmark and are monitoring it for yourselves to see whether or not you're getting to where, hitting the benchmarks and getting to the goal that you've set. So I guess the point is establish a baseline and then move from there. Next slide.
So before I move to the next slide, there's a comment. It's not a question, but it's in keeping with what you just mentioned, and that's we have quarterly rewards and celebrations for all students who meet attendance goals. We try to have culturally relevant posters, books in each classroom so students can see themselves there, and we do walkthroughs. Administrators do walkthroughs to be sure that classrooms are in fact including those things. That's
wonderful. And then I would add, if you were to level up at all with those strategies, see if there's a subgroup of students who are missing too much school, the quarterly reward may be too far down the road for them. You might have a subgroup of students who need a more immediate response when they show improvement. I know you all know these kids. And they're the kids who, as soon as they improve, they want you to notice them. And if they don't get noticed, they feel frustrated, and then they just act out again. And so there's a certain subset of kids that we have to be really, really sort of overly conscientious of, noticing when they're doing what we're asking them to do, because it's the only way to encourage them to keep doing that practice. And so I would add to that, because it sounds like those are good, really good whole school strategies, but now that we're moving into Tier 2, I would say look for those Tier 2 kids and what are some Tier 2 strategies to build on all the great work you're doing in Tier 1. And so for Tier 2, how we identify young people who are chronically absent, we're looking right away. We're not waiting until 6 or 8 or 10 weeks of school has gone by. So in the first 2 weeks, if a student has missed 2 days, they're already chronically absent. In the first 4 weeks, then it's 2 to 3 absences, and then after that, it's 10% of their days in a row or 2 or more days a month. Next slide. Now, this is key to attendance improvement strategy, and the question begins to become, why are kids missing school in my building, and what are the key factors that contribute to absenteeism? Every school has somewhat of a different set of factors that are driving absenteeism for their building. And what's important here is understanding which buckets your kids fall into and which subsections of those buckets. And so what we know from research is that misunderstandings, lack of understanding can play a significant factor. And one of the things I just want to draw your attention to as secondary school administrators and educators is this last bullet under myths. We have research talking to families whose kids are chronically absent, and we've asked them, when is attendance a big deal? And overwhelmingly, parents don't think attendance is a big deal until high school. And less than 50% of parents will respond that attendance is a big deal in elementary school. And why that matters to you as secondary educators is that what the result of that is that we have established patterns of behavior on both the part of the parents and the students that attendance doesn't matter until high school. And by then, you have a student who's been allowed to take off a day here or there, who's probably academically behind because of the pattern of absenteeism. And then all of a sudden, we're saying, oh, no, you need to show up every day. And so breaking bad habits is particularly challenging. And because we know from the research that this is a common misunderstanding, I just wanted to flag it for you. We know that some of our kids are going to have significant barriers to attendance. Transportation comes up a lot in both urban and rural areas. So in rural areas, if a student misses the bus, then it's really hard for them to get to school. In urban areas, oftentimes school districts rely on public transportation and to get their kids to school, and unfortunately, public transportation is not always reliable. Aversion, and so both aversion and disengagement, the issues identified in these two areas are similar, and it's more about the student reaction to the situation. And so students can become averse to attending school if they're struggling academically or socially. They can also become disengaged. And so these are interchangeable, but we wanted to point out the behavior so that you could understand that the intervention then is slightly different. For a student who's averse, it might require more intensive intervention, whereas when students are disengaged, we're really looking for how do we re-engage that young person either through peer relationships or through adult relationships and bringing them back into the building. We're going to talk in a moment about how you figure out for your school which pieces are most prevalent. Next slide. We want to begin with data, using your data to identify disproportionality, looking at a whole host of factors, looking at patterns during the year, looking at patterns among students, grades, like is ninth grade, which is a key transition year, your group of kids. Is it your repeating ninth graders? So the kids who are caught in ninth grade, who are your kids with the highest rates of absenteeism. Or are there particular classrooms where kids are more likely to be absent? We know the first period or end of period is oftentimes kids will skip those classes for a variety of reasons. And so then how do we adjust the schedule? So perhaps first period is something like art or some other kind of academic programming that students want to be, are more likely to push harder to get to, and scheduling maybe chemistry in second or third period, for example. We have absences due to suspensions, and so it's really important as administrators to explore your data and see how much of the student absenteeism is actually being attributed to student suspension, and whether or not for particular students there's other options to keep them in school and engaged, especially if it's causing them to miss enough school that they're academically at risk. Looking at geography, we know that an area for high schools, we expect our kids to be able to walk further to get to school every day. And oftentimes, if you look at the geography, you might find a pocket of kids who maybe live just on that outside edge of being able to, or inside edge of being able to get bus tickets, or you might find that there's a group of kids who come from a neighborhood that might be more challenging to walk through. So figuring out those patterns. And then once we identify through our data which kids are most affected, then the second part is having that qualitative analysis, having the conversations, the focus groups, the student surveys, the one-on-one check-ins, just asking students, you know, what's going on, to get to the stories behind the data so that you have a complete picture of what it is for your particular building that's driving the absenteeism. And I'm sure for you all, you're already thinking about some of the things that you know about. Next slide. This is just to mention, so interviews, focus groups, observations, staff insights, all different ways to identify causes of absenteeism. For example, if you map your data and there's a geographic hotspot, going out and visiting the hotspot and seeing what might be a driver, for example, or talking to the kids that live in that hotspot or their parents. Next slide. So I'm going to do just a quick comprehension check. It's 4 weeks into the school year, and a group of students have missed 2 days. Are they satisfactory attenders, at risk for chronic absence?
Sue, your sound has been lost.
Uh-oh.
Would you repeat that last part, please?
I was just asking people to, do you hear me, John?
Yes.
Okay, good. So just a quick comprehension check. It's 4 weeks into the school year, and a group of students have missed 2 days. Are they satisfactory attenders, at risk of chronic absence, or are they chronically absent?
I see one person's answered the question in the question box. You can put it in the chat or question if you want to answer. We've got lots of answers coming in. At risk, chronically absent. Yes, at risk, at risk, at risk.
All right, John, click it. They're chronically absent.
You want to explain why?
I'm sorry?
Would you explain why?
Yes, because they've already missed 10% of their days on roll.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they've now missed enough school. They're at a level of absenteeism that puts them into the chronically absent category, or tier 2. Next slide. So then when we get to interventions, and I know that somebody had asked earlier, so what's the bang for the buck? Research has demonstrated a couple of things. Engagement relationships. And so some of the things we've seen make the most significant difference are engagement through mentors and engagement through out-of-school time opportunities, whether those are school-based clubs or activities, sports, after-school programs, other in-school enrichment clubs that you might have, but really taking a look at which kids are missing too much school, and checking, are those young people involved in any kind of activities in your buildings? And if they're not, part of the exploration and turning that absenteeism around is figuring out what their interests are and starting to plug them into things where they can build relationships in your building, where they're involved in activities that they care about. One of the things that Dr. Balfons talks about is the fact that there are forces that are pulling our kids in different directions, and we're one force, right? We're the force that wants to pull them into school, into educational opportunity, and keep them engaged in learning. And then there's other forces that are pulling them out. It could be forces that are economic. It could be forces like other young people in their neighborhoods who didn't successfully graduate. And so we have to create enough of a force on our side that we win. We have a set of strategies here. I'm not going to say for you which one is the right one, because ultimately the strategies have to align with the challenges that your kids are experiencing. So in the same way that you evaluate what are the right academic interventions for a group of kids based on which skills they didn't get on a particular test or in an exam, we also have to align our interventions based on what are the challenges our kids are experiencing. And so even as we work to strengthen our relationships and find specific strategies around that, we also have to align our interventions around the kinds of things our kids are experiencing. We do have this Power of Positive Connections Toolkit on our website. It gives you guidance on establishing interventions and questions to ask, but we don't prescribe anything because we're not in your building, so we can't tell you for sure what's the right one. On the next slide, we have an example of a strategy that I do want to call out because of the evidence connected to it, and that is the Success Mentor strategy. It was first implemented in New York City in the 25 schools with the highest rates of absenteeism, and they found that the high school students that were connected to a Success Mentor improved their attendance by at least 9 days, and some of them as compared to the students who did not have a Success Mentor. This is an in-school strategy. You can use anyone in the building, including any partners that are in the building. The research says that they have to touch base at least 3 times a week, and it's as simple as a hello, how are you, great to see you today, don't you look smashing? And then at least one time, one out of those 3 times, a little bit more of a check-in. So maybe they have lunch with them, maybe they meet up with them during a free period, and just spend a little bit more time with them to see how things are going. And as we talked about earlier, we want to make sure that when kids who are at risk miss school, they get a phone call. This is a way to make sure that you have enough people to make the phone calls home. So you have the Success Mentor call their mentee, and so when they're not in school every day. And then the last thing I'll say about this strategy is that it is important to find someone who will coordinate the strategy for you, so that all your Success Mentors have someone to go to if they identify a more significant barrier. That information can be flagged and taken to the appropriate team for referral or intervention. We have a Success Mentor Toolkit on our website with letters and planning documents, et cetera, to help you implement this if you think that this is something you want to do. And also Mentor, our national partner in this work, provides free training for Success Mentors if you apply for it through their website. So we're almost done, and I just have one last reflection question for you, and that is, what do you already know about why students are missing school, or what strategies will you use to learn more about why students are missing school? And then if there's any questions before we close out.
Ironically, the question that is next up is, as you also mentioned, I think it's very important to understand why students are missing school. What type of data collection practices exist to record this information at schools so student trends can be uncovered and then strategies applied to what the data reveal?
We have student surveys, examples of student surveys on our website, so you're welcome to use that. So one of the things I should share with you is Attendance Works as a nonprofit. All the materials, resources, tools, everything on our website is free to use. And so the easiest way to find what you need, maybe just go to the next slide, John, so I can flag this for them, is
I went too far.
one before that?
There you go.
Yes, our Principals Toolkit. And the link is right there for you. And the Principals Toolkit sort of is an easy vehicle to navigate the rest of our website and links to a bunch of other stuff organized by these 4 areas. So we have survey tools you can use. The other opportunities are to use a focus group. And then ultimately, to your point, making sure that you have some consistent way of gathering that data and then reflecting on it as a team. Our survey tool provides you one vehicle to do that, but I think the most important part is gathering the evidence and then reflecting as a team. And then the last thing I'll say about that, when I work with schools, we care about everything we hear about. You're going to hear a range of stories and issues and barriers of why kids aren't coming to school. As a team, you have to narrow it down to the things that you have the most control over. And so there's the full plethora of stories, and then there's the things that you can make a difference around, either as a school or with the right partnerships, and you already know who to engage to help you with that. And then start there. And the thing that we've seen make the biggest difference is getting started. Schools start maybe with one strategy for one barrier that they know they have the most ability to influence, and they work on that. And then through that experience, you learn more about what it takes to get it done and about what else might be going on. And then you add another strategy, and you build the plane over time. And I know a principal in Baltimore City who has been at this for 9 years in a city where the average absenteeism rate is 1 out of 3 kids. His chronic absence rate is 5%. So it's less than 1 out of, I don't even know, it's 5%. So very, very few kids in his building miss school, and it's been something that has been built over time with lots of things being added over time as they got better at the work.
I've had a number of questions that have come in, Sue. Do you want to take those now?
Sure, we have 5 minutes.
Okay, someone said if they begin to improve their attendance and don't go over the 18 days, will they still be considered chronically absent?
They would be so to get to satisfactory attendance, they have to attend as an individual student at least 95% of the time. So your goal for academic success is to get your kids to 9 or fewer days of absenteeism. If they're at 10 to 17, they're still missing too much school. They're just not considered chronically absent. They're considered at risk.
Thank you. Next question is, attendance has been in the past something our staff was not involved with. As the Dean of Students, how do I get staff to become part of the team and see attendance as a shared responsibility?
I would suggest thinking of it as an organizer, and I think deans of students and principals often are organizing around a lot of issues. And so one thing is information sharing and getting people involved in the work because they understand because you have folks in your building who are there because they care about kids or they care about education and instruction. Lack of attendance is a barrier to their kids' success or a barrier to their kids' learning. And so one, they need to know that. And I think once you share that information and then say you want to work with them as a team to figure out how to solve the problem, they'll be more likely to want to get involved. But they have to understand how it connects to them personally and how it connects to what they care about personally. And once they get that connection, then the next step is to start planning as a team. So then the other thing I would also add is making sure that they see the data for your kids. And so making sure that they understand, what's the scope and scale of the absenteeism challenge for your particular building. So why should I care about this? What does it look like in my building? And then, okay, now what are we as a team going to do about it?
Great. There's a couple more questions, and we have about 3 minutes left. Is there an opportunity to see the presentation again? I can answer that. Yes, it'll be on the NASSP website within 48 hours. NASSP.org is where you'd find that. You mentioned advisories, Sue, and this person wants to know, are there any suggested implemented guides and resources and research on implementation of advisory?
There is, and I will say that to the point of the question, advisories have been, there's a whole range of how well it gets implemented. From not very well at all, there's no curriculum, teachers aren't really sure what they're supposed to be doing in advisory, it's happenstance too. It's a consistent part of our academic day every single day, and it's attached to a curriculum that includes in the freshman year, we're doing orientation, culture building, relationship building, and academic support all the way through to the senior year, and junior year, which is college and career exploration, getting ready for sort of launching into the world, right? And so what I can do, John, is share with you some of the best practices and research I know around advisories, and can we make it a part of this this presentation that people can access after the fact?
I'm not sure if we can tack that onto the presentation or not. I'll have to check with the technical folks for that. But
other suggestion I would have, John, is maybe we could insert it as a link,
okay,
and then repost it with the links. And so what I commit to do is going to pull a couple of the best pieces and adding that.
That's great. Thank you. Someone wants to know the name of the exemplary school in Baltimore.
Wolf Street Academy.
Okay. And is there a certificate or a transcript to show attendance? Yes, you can get that at nassp.org to get your attendance and your transcript for having been a part of this today. And I know I missed a question here. I'm trying to find it again. What is considered improved attendance? No, we already did that. Send back way back.
So, yeah, we did that one. So baseline and then going from there until we get to our target, which is a student attending at least 95% of their days on roll.
And then we have a couple of people who have said thank you and how much they appreciate the links that you've provided. And I'm going to go forward one slide to make sure that people see that link, the www.attendanceworks.org. Sue, you mentioned a partner organization that had a link that gave some valuable tools, and I didn't jot it down. Can you repeat it, or do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yes, the organization is called Mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go back up to the Success Mentor slide.
Let's see if I can find that quickly.
Pretty sure I have the link to the Success Mentor Toolkit there.
Okay.
And built within the Success Mentor Toolkit, there's the section on recruiting, training, and supporting your mentor.
Yeah,
and that is actually takes you straight to Mentor. And it also takes you to signing up for, don't worry about it. I think it's there. But what we have, so the organization is called Mentor, so you can search for them and pull them up. We also have links to them through our website.
Okay. The other questions that have come in since while we were talking is, can you share once again where to find the slides after the webinar? Yes, I can. nassp.org/webinars, where you'll find them. And there'll also be a recording of Sue at that point. And are there posters that we can use from Attendance Works in our schools?
Yes, they are available on our website. You can get to them through the Cultivating Good Attendance section of the Principal's Toolkit, or you can go to our website and search communication, and you will be able to find it there.
Okay. I want to thank you, Sue. This has been a really good webinar, and the number of people who are saying thank you and complimenting you on a great webinar just keeps going on in the question box. Thanks. So thank you all.
I'm so happy to be helpful. So thank you to all of you for the amazing work you do every day.
Well, and I want to invite all of you who are principals, assistant principals, other leaders in schools to the 2018 National Principals Conference, July 11th through 13th in Chicago. That information is on your screen right now, and you can go to the NASSP website to learn more about that. Again, thank you all for participating today, and appreciate today's activities. Sue, thank you once again.
Thank you, John. Bye, everyone.
Bye.